Today we're going to talk about ogres playing onions. No, layers. We're going to talk about layers. Layers is the term that I use for large constructs of character building options that can be applied in combination with each other to create a larger concept. A quick example in 5th edition is that you have race is a layer, class is a layer, background is a layer. These three things are applied in combination. They are sets of features, sets of rules that are packaged together, and you can stack them up to create a character idea, character concept. You can't pick two races because those are the same layer. So you can't pick any two options that are the same layer as each other. You have to pick an option from each layer and then stack them up, and that creates your character. Lots of games use layers. 4th edition, famously, well, maybe not so famously, 4th edition had layers, had a lot of layers, actually. It had race, class, background, starting with the Player's Handbook 2. They introduced backgrounds. Those are your layers that you would have at level 1. At character creation, you have those 3 layers. And then at higher levels, you would apply a new Paragon Path layer. And at an even higher level, you would apply an Epic Destiny layer. I like layers as a mechanical phenomenon, mechanical implementation, because they allow you to sort of package together multiple thematic and mechanically similar and mechanically related items into a single package that the player can say, I want that package because it looks cool. I'm going to apply it to my character and just sort of build up this character. This is distinct from like individual options like feats, particularly because you take multiple feats. And so they're kind of interchangeable with each other. They don't really create a layer. It's more of a sprinkling. It's different from spells because, again, spells kind of they don't apply as a single unified concept. It's different from individual features, even when you get to choose your features, which you almost never get to do in 5th edition. But in like 4th edition, you would get to choose powers at each level, most levels. Different from that because those are too small. That is an individual, single mechanical representation, or a mechanical piece. It's like a bit. Layers need to be sort of multiple linked things. So I guess technically backgrounds didn't count, but themes do. 4th edition, backgrounds are very, very small. Themes were a little more expansive. So what I like about layers is that you can really punch in these the flavor ideas, particularly with things like themes and Paragon Path. You can really incorporate these things into the world that you're running your game in. You can have like something that is, you are the descendant of this famous character. You are a nobility from this particular location. Those kinds of things where you can really work the character into the world that they exist in. Layers allow you to create these sort of templates for how the characters are perceived in or are related to the world that they inhabit. And they do it in a way that I find very satisfying. In addition, they're a great way for introducing gradually additional complexity in a character as you go up. So, like I said, 4th edition, you start with race. We're going to ignore background for a moment because it's arguable that background is too small, but like race, theme, class, and those are the things that you pick. You also do pick usually you pick a subclass type of ability where you pick an optional feature for your class. At level 1, you could potentially consider that a layer because it does interact with mechanics in the future, but it's probably less whatchamacallit. It's less involved than I would normally think of for a layer. And you go 10 levels with just those. And then at level 11, you're picking a Paragon Path, which is a new layer. Your character is getting more complex, more deep, more interesting, more mechanically rich once you have reached a high enough level. And that way, the game knows you have spent some time with this character. You understand all of its tools. Let me give you some more tools, this new layer of tools. And that helps prevent characters from being too complicated right at the beginning. If you were picking, race, class, theme, background, Paragon Path, Epic Destiny, you're picking all of these things right at level 1, that's too much. There is such a thing as too much at level 1. But by spreading it out, you allow, higher level characters get these additional layers. Now, one could apply this if one were so inclined. If you were redesigning 5th edition's class structure, you could say that at the beginning of you get your race and your class, and at the beginning of every tier, if we were to officially acknowledge tiers, I know the tiers in 5th edition are kind of unofficial, at the beginning of every tier, you pick a new additional layer. So at level 1, you would pick, say, your subclass. I'm in favor of subclasses at level 1, but you would need to fix multiclassing in order to make that work. Okay. At level 1, you pick your subclass. At the beginning of tier 2 is level 4. At level 4, you would pick some other thing. Not a subclass, but kind of like a subclass. And then at level 11, you would pick some other thing, kind of probably equivalent to a Paragon Path. At level 17, you pick something kind of equivalent to an Epic Destiny. So as you get higher, the concepts for these layers get a little bit more broad, probably a little less class specific. I would kind of think the first 2 would be class specific, and then after that they sort of start to expand, where they might be dependent on class, but they might be dependent on, say, your relationship to a particular faction. You could have faction specific options in these layers. Or you could, maybe you get your abilities from a certain power source, if we wanted to acknowledge the existence of power sources, which I know 5th edition doesn't really. These kinds of ideas would allow you to introduce character complexity over time while allowing every character to remain simple at the beginning. Because these things don't because they're not replacing class features. They're not replacing class progression. As it is now in 5th edition, if you pick a subclass at level, let's say 3, it's kind of a bummer that you don't get that at level 1. But at level 3, you're getting your subclass abilities. Usually you're getting nothing else, unless you're a caster. Then you're getting 2nd level spells as well. Which is probably why I think most casters probably don't get it at level 3 now that I think about it. Yeah, it's good. It's good, yeah. They probably get them at earlier levels, like level 2, so that they aren't getting a new level of spells at the same time. Crazy. The logic that goes into that. But anyways, and then at a later level, like say level 6, you get another subclass feature instead of getting a class feature. My proposition is that you would get these things either all at once when you pick that layer, 2 or 3 features that work for your class right away, or they would be spread out over a few levels, but they are in addition to the things you get from your class. Your class table would still have stuff at every level, but then you get your subclass and your Paragon Path and your everything else. All those other layers that we are applying, you get all of those in addition. It's kind of why I'm in favor of taking ability score increases / feats and making them their own thing that advance based on character level. Because replacing class features to get something that is very, very generic feels bad and usually is bad and is pretty boring in general. It's always going to be less flashy than getting a new class feature, because class features are unique to your class. They really add to your identity sometimes. They can. Whereas feats / ability score increases are very generic. They don't usually feel that good, even if they are mechanically powerful. They just don't feel like, they don't have that pizzazz of getting some new thing that is unique to your class or even your subclass. So pulling those out and making them based on character level progression and giving classes features to fill in those levels to replace them, I think that would be ideal. But we're talking about some pretty deep level, like redesigning 5th edition's class structures kind of territory here. So yeah, layers I think are really good. A few other games kind of do this a little bit. You could argue that titles in Legend of the Five Rings are a kind of layer, because you have your clan, your family, your school as layers. These things all make a big difference to your character in various ways, school being the most influential. But I would argue that if your character gets a title, that also represents a layer of rules and mechanics for your character. Let me think. Does Fabula Ultima have layers? Classes are definitely a layer. But you have more than one class. You have up to 5. Actually, I think you can have up to 8 technically. Anyways, yeah, so some other classes probably have layers, like Blades in the Dark or like Powered by the Apocalypse games. They usually have just the one layer. You have your playbook, which is fine because those games don't really focus on character advancement very much, and so they keep things pretty simple, and they're low crunch games to begin with. This idea of layers largely applies to high crunch games, high complexity games, D&D and adjacent. And I think utilizing layers in game design more would probably be beneficial to everyone involved. I like layers. Maybe you like layers too. I don't know. I just thought I would talk about layers a lot. And so I did.